Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Introducing the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse webinar. At this time, all phone lines are in mute mode. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. At this time, I'd like to pass it to Jessica Wilcox with the Bureau of Justice Assistance.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar, An Introduction to the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse. State, local, and tribal criminal justice agencies are increasingly using risk assessments to assist with the allocation of limited resources to promote the well-being and safety of our communities. Practitioners are using risk assessments at all decision points in the criminal justice system to determine if a person should be detained pending trial or release, to target programming and monitoring in the community to reduce recidivism for those on probation or parole, or to make reentry preparation for people transitioning from prison to the community. While the use of risk assessments is increasing nationwide, there exists a knowledge gap in the field on the science and practice of risk assessment, on detailed information about commonly used assessment tools, and ways to implement or improve the use of risk assessments to promote safer communities. We think an understanding of risk assessment tools is critical to strengthening efforts to increase the safety of communities. And that is why the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance is proud to host the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse, a one-stop resource that provides up-to-date and objective information about risk assessment. The Clearinghouse also provides practitioners in the field with training and technical assistance on issues related to the development, validation, adoption, implementation, and use of risk and needs assessments. We are really excited to see this clearinghouse put to work in the service of promoting safer communities across the country. And we look forward to promoting an understanding of the significance of this national resource and the critical information it contains. But before we dive in, I want to thank the Urban Institute's Justice Policy Center for their great partnership and amazing work in the development of the content and resources for this clearinghouse. And now I'll turn it over to them, to Jesse Janetta, Kiddup Kim, and Kelly Roberts-Freeman, subject experts at Urban, who will give you an overview of the site and will be able to answer your questions. Over to you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jessa. Thanks to everyone who has joined the webinar from all over the country. My name is Jesse Janetta. I'm starting things off for our team. I'm a Senior Policy Fellow at the Urban Institute's Justice Policy Center, and I am the lead over technical assistance provision through the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse project. So what we would like to do with the hour that we have for you is to introduce you to the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse website and do a walkthrough of the website, how it works, and how we've set up and organized the information in it so that hopefully, if it is sufficiently exciting and inspiring, you all can do a much deeper dive in looking at the resources and information we have there. So we'll be walking you through all the different pieces of the Clearinghouse website so you have a sense of what's there and how it's organized. We'll take a little bit of time to also speak about the technical assistance opportunities that are available through the Clearinghouse project as well, including how to request them and some information about the kind of engagement and the level of intensity that we have there. And then we've tried to time this so that we are leaving a good amount of time at the back end for questions. Again, as Polly mentioned in introducing, you can answer the questions at any time through the Q&A function. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. So with that said, I am going to actually dive into the website itself. Hopefully what everyone is now seeing is the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse website. Maybe I'll ask our friends at BJOJP to verify that that is in fact what is in front of everybody.
Yes, that's what we're seeing.
All right, perfect. So this is a landing page for the Clearinghouse website. We organized it primarily around some of the key ways that you might think about risk assessment tools starting around the basics and then getting into information about how you might decide to select and information to support selection of the right tool, thinking about validation, how to analytically examine the question of whether your risk assessment tool is predicting what it's supposed to predict, then implementation, which is really about how you take the tool and put it in place, and particularly tying it to structured decision-making. Risk assessment tools, after all, are decision aids, and it's really hard to think about how to implement them or how to make them work effectively without tying that very closely to the decision or decisions that they are supposed to inform. Certainly we have the resources page where you can access all the kinds of information, both what's out in the world that we have tried to put together in one place, as well as some content that the Clearinghouse team has put together. And so we'll, myself and Kaduk and Kelly will be walking you through each of these in a little bit more detail. But as you can see here, there's a couple different ways to navigate through. You can click on each of these things at the top, and it takes you to that section. But also if you go to the main and scroll down, we have these very nifty buttons to take you to each of these, as well as the TA request function, which I'll walk you through at the end. And then if you look here and you click on the bars, we also have the ability to navigate through all of these. So we have multiple different ways, but these are the top line organizing principles of the website, and everything falls within one or the other of them. So I'll start with the basics, which is intended to be a sort of risk assessment, risk needs assessment 101. One of the challenges that we tried to meet in developing the Clearinghouse is recognizing that people will be coming here for information from very different levels. There will be people who are working in agencies that have had validated tools, have been using them for many, many years, and have a high degree of information and knowledge about risk assessment. But we'll also anticipate that we have people coming to the website who may be new to thinking about risk assessment, and certainly that includes members of the public. I will say that one of the things that we're aware of is the public conversation about risk assessment questions in the media and in reform conversations about what role risk assessment should play, or even whether risk assessment should play a role. That's a much more public conversation right now than it was even a few years ago when we started the Risk Assessment Clearinghouse project. So I say that to say that what we want to do is have information that's appropriate and provides an access point to thinking about risk assessment no matter where people are starting. And so the Basics tab in the 101 is really intended at a very, summary and hopefully clear level to organize some of the foundational information about what we're talking about, and to kind of orient people who are coming in around, starting with a conversation about what we mean by risk. Risk is obviously a common term used in everyday conversation, and so part of what we want to make sure we're doing is saying, here's what we mean by the concept of risk here, and particularly it's about the likelihood of either reoffending or misconduct in the future. And Justice spoke about this briefly. One of the purposes here of talking about risk is also to orient people to what is in or out of the scope of the Clearinghouse. It's worth mentioning that our charge with the Clearinghouse is to put together information about risk assessment and its use in the adult criminal justice system. There are a suite of tools and approaches that are designed for juveniles in the juvenile justice system. Those are not included in the Clearinghouse. There's also a world of risk around risk of victimization and re-victimization, for example, lethality assessments in ways that you're looking not at risk of misconduct or reoffending, but looking at risk that people might be re-victimized. That's a very important but distinct world of risk in the criminal justice context that is also not part of the Risk Assessment Clearinghouse. So what we're laying out here is this concept of likelihood of reoffending or misconduct in the future, but also wanting to distinguish a little bit between risk and need, and particularly defining need as those areas generally dynamic that represent targets for change. So if you want to actually be reducing risk, if you want to be guiding effective behavior change interventions, here you need the need factors. Many of the more complex risk assessment tools are risk needs assessments and are attentive to need factors to help identify targets of change. So this is what we're trying to lay out what we mean by risk. And then the next piece of the 101 is looking at what is risk assessment. So what are the tools that operationalize this concept and attempt to measure it in a consistent way? So what is risk assessment context? And here, we're trying to talk in a consistent way across pretrial tools, tools that might be used in sentencing, tools that might be used post-adjudication to inform, for example, levels of supervision, or correctional program assignment, talking across all of these with the very basic concept of what actuarial risk assessment is, what some of the virtues are, focusing on consistency, efficiency, and effectiveness, what are the reasons that you might want to use them, some very basic overview of how you develop them and what it means to do actuarial prediction, and then showing what it means to look at a very top and generalized level about what those risk assessment results might look like. And then finally, what we thought would be helpful here, you may be familiar with the way that researchers and experts have talked about the history of risk assessment and its evolution through 4 generations, first being professional judgment alone, the second where you're starting to do actuarial prediction, where you're doing statistical models to look at the data you have available on people to identify what predicts reoffending and create models from it. Third generation, where you are building in the dynamic factors and needs that I mentioned, and then fourth generation, where you're starting to integrate with case management. This is particularly critical or valuable, we thought, because it both, as you think about this additively, I think it helps for people who are newer to assessment understand how people are building into, how different components are building into risk assessment and the pieces of it. But also it's relevant because all of these generations are present to some degree at the same time. We have out in the field second, third, and fourth generation tools all in use, each of them appropriate to the level of the task at hand. I was just pinged that somebody did send in a question on chat around interest in tools for risk assessment of juveniles. So there is some information on that, I think, that OJJDP has put together, and we can either follow up or you can write emails to us, because we are aware of those, and there is a fair amount of conceptual crossover. And the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention has put together some information about those. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to my colleague Kim to continue the walkthrough, talking about the information we put together around tool selection.
Thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. This is Kim. I'm a senior fellow in the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute. I'm going to introduce a couple of products that we developed under this clearinghouse. But before we get into those, let me just take your attention to the Resources tab. And under here, learn more, there's an email that you can send to us if you have any questions. Okay, this is the email to us. So I'm going to start with the selection page. So this selection page is designed to provide information about how to select an assessment tool for criminal justice decision making. We identified roughly 60 widely used risk assessment tools. So this is a repository of those risk assessment tools. There are important considerations involved in determining which tools to use or adopt. So So we thought this tool in a repository would be helpful for folks considering the adoption of the tools to kind of be able to compare different tools and be able to identify the tools that could meet their needs. So there are several filters built into this tool selector. As you can see down here, there are a number of those tools that I mentioned listed. And then the left panel here, you can filter the specific tool based on what you need. So let's say you want to find a tool that predicts general recidivism. You can click on this and apply, hit an apply button, and then the web page will show the tool that meets that criterion. So you can click on any of these tools. Let's say you want to know more about Ohio Risk Assessment System, ORS, and then it'll give you more information about that specific risk assessment tool. You can click on more information and it will populate a tool description. So this tool predicts the general recidivism, and it is for adult population, and it also has information about the availability of training, how long it will take to complete the assessment, when it was developed, who developed it, and the kind of items included in the assessment tool, and so on and so forth. So going back to this tool selector, so a number of filters that we built into this include the functionality, outcome, service population, training availability, and interview requirements. So following these filters, you can identify the tools that might fit your jurisdiction's needs and be able to compare different types of tools. One thing that I want to point out is once you apply certain filters, if you want to go back, you have to refresh the page by clicking on this arrow button. Then you can go back. And also there's a document that we prepared for folks considering the adoption of these tools. This will be a helpful guide for those interested in learning more about how to go about selecting a tool. Okay. Going back to the tool selector. So that's the overview of the tool selector. And there's another main component to this web page that is risk assessment landscape. So one of the questions that came up pretty frequently was, I want to know what my neighbor's jurisdictions are using for their risk assessment processes. So the Clearinghouse team reached out to criminal justice practitioners and researchers across the country to collect information about current practice in risk assessment. We received information from 43 states about their experiences with the risk assessment within their jurisdictions. We asked a bunch of questions about how they are using risk assessment tools, what tools they are using across these different decision-making points, starting from pretrial, going to jail, prison, release, parole, and probation. So the survey data we collected is summarized in this chart. So, for example, if you click on Arizona for pretrial, you will get more information about what they're using and whether that practice is statewide standardized or locally varying. So you'll get more information about, you'll need some time going through all this material, but that's just a gist of what we have prepared here. And if you want to get a more detailed information about how we collected the data and the survey results, which is a little brief that you can download, this will tell you more about the methodology that we use and what kind of findings that we got from our survey work. Okay, going back to the main sub page. So these are the two main applications that we developed. And the last item here is just a library of all the documents that we have prepared on this topic. So you can come here and click on any one of these documents and read more about how to go about selecting a tool. Now, validation. This page provides useful resource on what validation is and why it is important to validate a tool and how to evaluate validation results and questions like that. So click on risk of validation. We developed a couple of whiteboard videos to explain the concept of validation. The validation is really important, but it has a lot of technical and statistical details. So we try to translate those technical knowledge into more easily digestible content here. So there's a video that you can play and some description about statistical concepts of validation and how to go about validating a risk assessment tool. And there's some example that explains how you should think about the validation and what kind of key metrics you can measure for tool validation, and why it is important to validate and revalidate a tool, and why is it important to do a local validation. So you can read all about that here on this page. And there are also policy briefs that we prepared. You can read a lot more about these policy briefs at your leisure. So currently there are 3 policy briefs that we put up there. And all these documents are also saved on the validation resources. It has the same structure as a tool selector. We listed all the validation studies and any relevant information, the documents, so you can filter, through these collection of relevant resources and identify the documents that you need. Whether you want to read more about journal articles or policy briefs about tool validation, you can select those information, identify them here. And again, if you want to unclick all this, you have to click on this refresh button, and it'll get you the entire set of our collection. So that kind of sums up the 2 sub-pages on the Clearinghouse website, selection and validation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk a little bit about the implementation sub-page.
Thank you, This is Kelly Freeman. I'm a research associate at the Urban Institute's Justice Policy Center, and I'm also the project manager for the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse. And as Cadet mentioned, I'll be talking about the implementation page as well as the resources page. So when you click on the implementation page, it brings you to 3 items that you can click on to learn more about how risk information can be translated into practice. As Jesse mentioned, a big component of that is structured decision making. And so when we click on the structured decision making guide, you'll see that there are 5 different decision points where you can look into the key principles for those decision-making frameworks at each of those stages. And so, in general, this structured decision-making is aimed at ensuring that a particular decision-making process is working as it should and that it relies on the evidence base for risk assessment. And this makes it, let's just check out, I guess, the pre-trial stage out first. As you'll see if you scroll through this page, there are a number of questions that a jurisdiction will want to answer so that they may best align the outcome decisions and programming decisions with assessed level of risk. And the user can also see what it looks like to make things like supervision decisions based on the level of risk that an individual scores on a particular tool. And in this example, it actually provides the risk score on the CPAT, and then it also provides sort of decisions on supervision level based off of the ascending category as well. And these questions also are similar across each of those decision stages, although they're not the same for each, and there are different distinctions to be made depending on the decision point that you're looking at or interested in. And then going back to the implementation page, we also provide a checklist for agencies to rely on prior to implementing a tool. And on this implementation checklist, you'll see that they're broken down into different categories. So the first category is regarding tool selection. Then you'll see validation, the assessment process, and the structured decision-making sorts of questions that should be answered or addressed prior to adopting a tool, although it still may be useful for those who have already implemented a tool or who are interested in validating a tool as well. And then the last resource under the implementation subpage is, again, aptly titled Implementation Resources, which is similar to the other features where it provides briefs as well as the documents that were in this implementation section. So you can actually click on these to get a PDF version which provides the full information across each of the different decision points. And you can also see the checklist as well. So there's a quick kind of resource to get to under that resources page. And then going under the resources, the last sort of subcategory on our website, there's a listing of risk assessment experts that appears first. And these are experts from around the country that can be contacted for guidance. The Clearinghouse staff identify these individuals based on the available validation research that we were able to come across. And then this is including both scholarly research articles and government sources as well. And then we conducted outreach to obtain their agreement and participation in this listing. And again, this is an option for you to filter based off of the population of interest and the focus area, as well as the region of the country. So for instance, if you are interested in looking at female populations, you can click on the special focus area and come up with an expert in that area. And as Kadook had mentioned previously, we could just use the refresh button to be able to access all of the options for this expert page. The resources page also includes some self-directed videos and other media that we plan to update over time to include new material. So as you'll see here, these are providing information about risk concepts in the criminal justice setting, so provide sort of basic risk assessment basics presentation, and then there's also more detailed information on validation and what sorts of metrics can be used to validate a tool. And then the last item that I haven't mentioned quite yet is the resources on this page as well. Again, this has a search feature essentially where you can filter options to access articles and briefs that are produced by the Clearinghouse staff but are also produced elsewhere by other experts. and that includes journal articles, and then other guides that have been developed. And this can be based off of, if you click on a journal article, it will actually take you to an external site so that you can access that article. And there are a couple places on the website where technical assistance can be requested, but it's also available on the resources page. And that, for that discussion, I'll actually turn it over to Jesse.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, the last thing that we want to take some time to drill down on is the way in which the Clearinghouse is not just a web-based resource, but also a technical assistance resource. There is the ability to request assistance from the resources page. I'll also flag when you are on the main page, you can scroll down, and here's the request assistance place. Either of those take you here to where you have the intake form to request assistance, so you're asked to put some information about yourself and describe a few basic things about where you are and what you need, but the meat of it is your 500 characters articulating the challenge or the issue on which you need technical assistance. And so these requests go to NTAC, and they then reach out and let our team know when we have requests coming in, and we work to be very prompt in our response to this, and particularly to start getting on the phone. Often we find that at that kind of intake, that the initial conversation to drill down to greater detail about what the challenge or the issue is particularly helpful. And to give a sense of what some of that technical assistance can look like, or the scope, so you can think about whether or not or in what way our assistance might potentially be of value to some of the challenges that you all are facing around risk and needs assessment. We have it available for issues related to developing, to validating, to selecting, to implementing risk assessment. The TA is light touch and is generally delivered remotely. There is some possibility for more extensive engagements. On that, we need to consult with BJ and just make sure within the one common pool of resources we have for assisting state and local jurisdictions and communities that more intensive TA would make sense and be a good use of resources, and that it would be equitable. I think, the challenge always with assistance like this is thinking about the trade-offs between being able to provide some level of assistance and guidance to many places versus some of the issues that might take more of a deep dive or more intensive work to support. In addition to training and support and guidance, we also have some ability to do some brokering and connections to people who are experts in various ways in the field of risk and needs assessment. And we're actually in a position we could talk a little bit about examples of some of the TA that we've done, because while the Clearinghouse website has launched only recently, during the entire time that our team has been working with BJA on developing the content for the website, NTAC and BJA and OJP have been referring requests to our team as they arise in the course of other work, or as requests come into NTAC in general that are related to risk assessment and within our scope. So some of the common kinds of assistance that people have requested, many have been places that are thinking about implementing a tool for the first time and could use some structured guidance and walkthrough about what the tools are that exist that are appropriate to a decision point and how they might think about selecting from among them. We've had guidance in that area around pretrial risk assessment. We've talked to people involved in a couple of post-adjudication reentry or community supervision programs that are just starting up and they wanted to have some risk and needs assessment in place that would be manageable given the staff resources they had, but also make sure that they were getting the right target population in terms of risk level in the programming, and that they were identifying what the needs were that they might want to serve through the program. We've had a number of jurisdictions that have wanted to engage us thinking about how to go about designing and looking at validation. We've seen that on the front end where a place was thinking, for example, we don't have a pretrial assessment yet. We want to put one in place. We know we want to validate it, and actually we're even thinking about whether we want to validate a existing, commonly used pretrial risk assessment tool, or whether we want to build and validate our own. So walking through how to think about that. We've also had jurisdictions or programs come to us where they've actually had a risk assessment tool in place for quite some time as part of what they're doing, but they haven't actually locally validated it, but they know that that's something important to do, and they can use some assistance in thinking through what would be required to do that. Skipping a little bit among the bullets, but some of that is even involved actually looking at some of the data that folks have locally to help them think about what their options are for looking at validating the risk factors, and also as an example for places looking to validate pretrial assessment, how they can operationalize in their data, knowing whether someone has a failure to appear in court, and navigating the issues about, there may not be a data field that says whether or not somebody has failed to appear. You have to use issues of warrants or things like that as your, proxy measure for that. So helping places think specifically within their data about how they need to do validation. We've done training on risk assessment basics, in many ways an extended version of what's on the basics page, the Risk Assessment 101. This has often been something that places have engaged us with around wanting to educate their end users. So, for example, in jurisdictions that want to move towards pretrial risk assessment, engaging with the judges and getting them informed and familiar about what risk assessment is, how it works, not even necessarily the specific tool they're going to work, but just what is actuarial prediction? Why do we want to use a decision aid like this? How are these tools built? Often I would say some of the value that they find is getting somebody that their end users, their judges, their probation officers, their pretrial staff can interrogate about the tools and ask hard questions, because they're being asked to really incorporate these actuarial tools into what are really critical and high leverage decisions, and those folks want to know and be really confident in that they understand what the risk assessment tool is and how it works, and that they can ask hard questions and get them answered before they commit to buy in and use it. We've also been asked to weigh in or assess locally developed and validated tools because they want an outside and objective expert to speak to things about, how does a locally developed tool look relative to standard practice? Are there common tools in the field? Is the construct validity good? Was the way that the tool was developed and validated sound, or was it sound in terms of methodology and things like that? So these aren't in any sense an exhaustive list of the kind of assistance that we can provide, but it is, I think, illustrative of some of the things that we have done. I have already showed you the intake platform. I think we did a pretty decent job, hopefully not too whirlwind, of getting to questions with 20 minutes for discussion. And actually, while we are doing the questions, I'm going to go ahead and pull back up the contact information for our team. I think we're very open to questions that come out. And also, one of the reasons that BJ wanted to create the risk assessment clearinghouse in the first place is understanding that there's a lot of information of various kinds about risk assessment, and it's all over the place. It hadn't been collected, so I think we've done our best to survey a lot of things and build the start of that resource library, but I think we're all highly confident that there are things that are probably missing. I think we certainly welcome suggestions about other things to include in the resource library. It's also a challenge to talk across all the different ways the risk assessment is used in a way that is applicable and relevant to all of them. So I say all of that to say that I think collectively, both the urban team and BJ welcome feedback of all kinds. Our belief was that this kind of resource was something that should be really valuable to folks in the field, and I think hearing from people as they engage with it about what's good, what's bad, what could be added would be tremendously helpful. So with that, I am going to attempt to look at the Q&A, or I don't know, Colleen, if you want to be monitoring and willing to read those out if Q&A is coming in, and we can look to answer that if that makes sense. That might be make it easier for us to pay full attention to what should be paid attention to.
Sure, I'm happy to read out the Q&A. And as a reminder, if you do have a question, please feel free to type it into that Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. So our first question is there a reason why federal districts aren't listed? Are federal courts using risk assessments?
I don't know if you want to. I think the use of risk assessment in the federal system is certainly there. It does exist in BOP, in pretrial, in federal probation.
Right. It was just out of scope at the time of this project conception. I'm sure there's a lesson to be learned from those tools, the use of those tools, but unfortunately we just couldn't include those tools at this time.
Our next question is, are you planning to have a section that covers best practices for the development of a tool locally? That's part one of the question, so maybe taking that one first, and then I can read part two of the question.
Yeah, and I think if you explore, it'd be great actually as you're asking that question to hear from you once you look at the validation section in depth. So in a lot of ways, those sections are tied together because when you're validating or when you're developing a tool locally, part of that is building it and then validating it as part of the development process. And so we've tried to talk about validation both from the perspective of you're taking a tool that already exists, whether it's something like the LSIR or the PSA or what have you, and validating it locally, but also the way it looks from the perspective of if you're developing your own tool and building the model and validating it locally. So that's sort of incorporated within the validation section. And then also in the resources page, there are a number of studies that are there that are, they're validation studies or descriptions of that process in specific places, but those can also be used as, so to speak, case studies or exemplars of what that can look like.
And part two of that question is on the website currently, is there an area that covers disproportionate minority impact and tool development, or would that be forthcoming?
Yeah, we are working on a brief on that topic. It's forthcoming.
Yeah, and so, there's a little bit about both thinking about doing sub-analyses of that, I think, when we're talking about validation in general. But obviously, I would say this is the single biggest public issue related to the practice of risk assessment right now. We're working on developing something on that separately, and even, thinking about how, one of the challenges around it is thinking about, really what you want to get to is fairness and equity, I think, in the way that tools are done. But part of the challenge is, defining fairness and equity and justice or in anything else is not simple. And so part of what we want to talk about is some of the different ways that people have tried to operationalize that. How, when people are trying to test a risk assessment tool, to see how it, interacts with racial and ethnic disparity, what are the different ways they do that, and what does each of them tell you because I think there's no single simple answer to that question about how tools are interacting with those issues.
Thank you. So at this time, we don't have any additional questions, so I'll just give folks maybe a couple more minutes in case they're working on formulating their question.
While we are waiting for more questions to come in or being formulated, I just want to say one more thing. So the survey data that we collected, they are at this point at least 1 year old, and I just want to recognize how fast our field is evolving on these issues. So if you see an outdated information, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to collect the information, validate the information, and update the web content as soon as practicable.
Still showing no additional questions, so we'll just give you a minute.
I saw another one, which is there a cost to get TA, and is there a long wait time, or does help come pretty quickly? So there is no cost for the TA. I mean, this is part of the funding that BJ provided us. We had the mandate not only to build the content and put it out for the clearinghouse, but also to provide the TA. So we have the resources to do that. Within the bounds, there may be some things that you would really need done that might exceed what we're able to put in terms of resources. I would say we have up until now been good, I think, about being timely in terms of doing the TA intake and working on. And, our process is a couple of steps. We do an intake call. We just want to really refine and make sure that we're clear on the ask, have that put down on paper, even if it's a very simple scope of work in bullets, just so everybody can look at it and say, we all agree, like, this is the ask, this is what we need the clearinghouse team to do. I think we've been pretty prompt at that. One of the reasons that will be interesting to see is now that the website is up, I think both our team and BJA have some guesses about what the volume will be of requests, but we don't know. But I think our goal will be, like, once our team knows about a request, that we're on the phone with you within 2 weeks at the outside to be really refining and getting that going.
Thanks. And we have had a couple more questions come through. So I'm actually going to combine two of them together. It's how often the information is updated, and are you working with specific artificial intelligence companies to gather data, or is there guidance for how technology is evolving and interacting with risk tools from that AI perspective?
We're not working with any private companies or nonprofit organizations on AI. There's a couple of publications that we prepared on that topic. Along with the racial bias and many other topics, there is a list of topic areas that we plan on addressing, and that work is ongoing and evolving. So just stay tuned, come back to the website. We'll update the content as frequently as we can. But at this point, I would just say there will be more information coming on the way.
Yeah, and I think part of what is there is that in getting this up, you have to do the trade-off between describing what is, which is a lot of work, and then building out the sort of getting ahead of the next things. I think the use of machine learning and AI is an emergent issue. It's very much in the public conversation, but when you look at what's actually in practice right now in terms of risk assessment, it's still pretty rare, at least unless we're really missing something, that, you know, AI tools are in place right now. So we think our charge in there is to sort of write to and get out ahead, exactly as the question is suggesting, thinking about what the ethical guidelines are, you know, and the challenges, which I'm sure you're aware of as you've been engaging with this, around what does it mean for transparency to have, you know, AI-derived risk prediction and things like that, where you might not even be able to get information about exactly why a prediction on an individual was what it was, because it is black box.
We've also had a couple of questions come in through chat. One question is, can the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse and team help with cut point or norming?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Please fill out the technical assistance request form, and we'll reach out to them to get a conversation going.
Thank you. And does it matter if an organization is for-profit or non-profit to receive technical assistance?
That is a question for Jessa.
We can, if you have a question, you can send it to BJ NTAC. That's B as in boy, JANTTAC at ojt.usdoj.gov, and we can get back to you. I'll also type that email address into the chat feature so that everyone can see it. And then I'm not showing, or wait, I think, yes, I'm not showing any more questions at this time, but we still have 7 minutes, so I'll give it maybe 1 more minute. If that works for you guys?
Sure, that works great for us. If we had anything else come in, Colleen?
No, still showing no additional questions, so I'm going to pass it to Jessa to give a sign-off.
Thanks. So Jesse, Kiddush, and Kelly, thank you so much for all of your work on making this resource, and thank you for walking us through it today and directing people to how they can find out additional information and make TA requests. So Colleen put the email in the chat, so we look forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. As a reminder, we will send a follow-up email with a copy of the presentation, and then hopefully we will have the webinar recording posted to the Public Safety Risk Assessment Clearinghouse website in the next couple weeks. Have a great afternoon.